So much of this gig is wildly, hilariously, frustratingly inconsistent. Libraries want different things, AIFs versus waves, fill out this spreadsheet, no, use this portal. We want these stems, and I'm going to need -10 LUFS, not -12. And that's not to mention how different types of cues seem to play by different rules. Do we write an intro? Should I incorporate a breakdown? Am I using a 3-act structure? Can we even change chords in this cue? It's enough to drive you completely crazy, but thankfully, I've found that there are some overarching guidelines which can help govern a lot of our creative choices. So today, I thought I'd share my 10 commandments of production music. Plus, we listen through the latest submission in my year of taxi, follow up on any returns or forwards, and I provide feedback on a cue written by a member of the 52 Cues community on this week's episode of the 52 Cues podcast. What is happening, everybody? This is Dave Croft, and welcome back to another episode of the 52 Cues podcast, a weekly podcast dedicated to all things production and library music, where we talk about industry topics and take deep dives into the different aspects of being a working production music composer. Plus, in my year of taxi update, we're going to check in on any returns or forwards, and then take a listen to this week's submission, which is an ambient minimal tension cue. And then a little later on, I'm going to give my thoughts on an energetic, nostalgic Broadway cue written by 52 Cues community member Mojo X, so you definitely want to stick around for that. If this is your first time here, welcome. I'm so glad to have you with me. I know you have a ton of options out there, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening to the audio podcast on the go. I just want to thank you for spending part of your day here with me. I also want to give a special word of thanks to the family, friends, and patrons of 52 Cues who help keep the podcast, the channel, and everything we do here going. We are 100% community supported, so if you like what I do here, don't thank me, thank them. But if you want to learn more about how you can help support 52 Cues and also unlock extra perks like live streams, workshops, feedback sessions, and a ton more, then be sure to click on the links in the description or stick around, because we're going to be talking more about that a little bit later in today's episode. So, time for my year of taxi check-in. And you remember from last week, I was super proud of Waltz of Shame, and I said, I'm stand by it. It's a bold choice. But sadly, I must report that Waltz of Shame needs to go from the submitted pile into the return pile. Yes, they did not like Waltz of Shame, and it was a return. They said they loved the title, and I'm proud of the title too. Very evocative. What a picture it paints in the listener's head. Cool string sound. So good. I'm glad. That's all Symphonia. What could be improved? Good solid cue that some libraries might find useful. However, you could improve it by removing some excess repetition, and it could stand some additional orchestration as you progress to give it a little more development arc forward motion. And then, I'm not crazy about the theremin sounding thing at 104. It gives a completely different feel here that feels pretty inconsistent with the idea of the cue and the overall feel. And I returned or forwarded this song because consistency is vital here. Using a sound that has been pigeonholed into a very narrow usage is risky, doesn't fit the rest of what you've presented here, and less overall repetition and more build would help it in the future. Okay, so first, the one thing that I did find was interesting is this kind of neg about some libraries might find useful. I don't know what that's about. I don't know if you read comments, because somebody, and I have to give a shout out to Mr. Paul Croteau, who called this in the YouTube comments. Paul said, "Hey, man, that theremin sounds a little Halloween-y." And also, I think Nigel from the community also said in one of our feedback sessions that it sounds a little bit like the Munsters. And he was right. Paul was right. Because I didn't listen to myself. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. The neg is some libraries could find useful. And so that comment came in, and I responded in saying that I've had really good luck with these types of cues placed over on Discovery Channel. And it wouldn't be the first time that I've had a taxi return from something that I've done elsewhere that has gotten error. So that's totally. So I don't know what that's about. That felt a little hinky, but the rest I think is on point. Namely, that I didn't do what I say, which I have a sign, which I've moved into the back, right? It says, read the bleeping brief. Well, here's what happened. The slide whistle came into play, and I was so excited about using it. I thought it sounded so great that I completely lost track of the fact that it sounded like a theremin. In my mind, I was going for more musical saw, but no, it sounded like a theremin. And whether I liked it or not, as soon as you bring a theremin into play, then you either have yourself a Halloween cue, or you have yourself like an old retro sci-fi cue. Through no fault of the theremin, or in this case, the slide whistle, which just happens to sound like a theremin. And I've given this same type of advice countless number of times to folks when they put things like sleigh bells into a cue. I've told people, hey, if you throw a sleigh bell onto the cue, then congratulations, you got yourself a Christmas cue. And that's no fault of sleigh bells. It's just culturally, we have associated sleigh bells with Christmas. Culturally, we associate theremin with Halloween or with retro sci-fi. And so putting it into that cue immediately associates it with that type of a placement. So if a music supervisor, an editor were to put my cue in there, it would create confusion. Now, if it's not a Halloween cue, it would create confusion. If it is a Halloween cue, home run, right? Well, in theory. So I didn't listen to my own dang advice here. I got excited about a sound, and I even said it's the hill I'm going to die on, and I'm dead on that hill. And they're right. Paul was right. Nigel was right. And I appreciate that. Lesson learned again. That's fine. It won't be the last time I've learned that. But here's what I can do now. I got in my pocket. You can't see, it's out of camera, but I put my hand in my pocket. I've got in my pocket a Halloween cue that's ready to go. And so I'm going to sit on this. I might throw it up to Motion Array or Pond 5 or something. You know, it's a little early for Halloween cues, but I have a Halloween cue that I know will find some love. The other thing they mentioned was the repetition. And I agree with this. I think I could have gone to the B section a whole phrase earlier and gotten away with that, I think, and filled out that B section. So I'll agree with that. But turns out they didn't like the theremin. I lost focus. I lost track of what I was really doing there and allowed the idea of something to get in the way of giving the library what they're actually asking for. So I'm telling Dave, remember these things. Remember these things. You don't just say them on the podcast. Actually do them, bro. So that's the lesson learned, and $5 down the toilet. That's fine. That's fine. That's why I do this. And getting returns for me is as valuable as getting a forward, especially if there's action items. And there are action items. There's actionable advice in that. So I appreciate that. Thank you. That was I forget which screener that was. I think it was it 396 or 403? Somebody who had actually given me forwards in the past. So thank you, screener. So this week I have submitted for a minimal ambient investigative tension instrumental cue. And they gave a handful of references directly from them. And this is what I mentioned last in our week one, the Read the Bleeping Brief, that if Taxi says references we got from them, then that meant that they received cues, references from the library. Otherwise, it's Taxi staff which pick out the references. And so here they say we are supplying several music supervisors with modern, italic, Investigative tension cues for a variety of ongoing TV shows. We don't need more of the dated forensic files or new detective style sound of the 90s and aughts. We need a newer, more updated sound that is still consistent with the dramatic investigative tension style. So, which goes on to say, send them top-notch investigative tension instrumental cues with an overall minimal, ambient, and subtle sound and feel that could work for modern crime shows. Your submissions can range from mysterious and ambient to minimally percussive and pulsing to just about anywhere in between. Whichever approach you choose, please be sure your cues have compelling motifs, ambient and or droning textures, and solid arrangements in the general wheelhouse of the references. Your instrumentation can include orchestral or electronic instruments, or a combination of both. Just be sure they have forward motion, interest, and a subtle sense of dynamic. Craft your cues around a central motif and layer instrumentation in and out to create audible beginning, middle, and ending. Your production needs to be polished, and any virtual instruments or samples need to be high quality and modern. So when I hear modern, the translation is usually synthy, a little bit of distortion, and not overly like using kind of retro-y sounding synths, like Vangelis-y type synths, maybe. I don't know. This is a little nebulous of what modern means, and this is where we just have to listen to the references and lean on the references. Submission should be about 2 minutes, and be ready to have alt mixes, but they just need full instrumentals and a 3-year deal. So that means that I guess after 3 years you can get it back. So the cue that I submitted was called "Breach in the Firewall," and we're gonna take a listen to it. All right, so that was "Breach in the Firewall." I tried to read the bleep and brief, right, and make sure that it has song sections here, so that when the editors look at it, right, they can see that there are different song sections, and try to give it a nice build breakdown section with a clearly defined edit point and modern sounds. And so yeah, we'll see if they dig it, and if I'll be able to move something from the move "Breach in the Firewall" to the forwards pile or to the return pile. But that's it. That's my Year of Taxi, and yeah. What about you? We have a Year of Taxi group happening over at 52 Qs, and that's free to join if you want to jump in and provide your own, post your own cues for your own personal year of taxi and follow along in my journey. And then finally, if you want to hear a breakdown of Breaching the Firewall, that is available to the friends and family subscribers. I do a complete breakdown, talk about all of the sounds and the mix and the master and all of that. So, like I said in the intro, working in the production music industry can be hilariously inconsistent. Different libraries want different things, different cues call for different things, and it can just be really, really frustrating, especially if you're new. You're like, okay, well, what do I do? I'm reading this, and Dave, you're saying this, and this other YouTube channel is saying this, and this book says this. Well, I am here to just share with you my 10 commandments. These are the things that govern so many of my choices, creatively, deliverables, working administratively, all of those things. So here are my 10 commandments of production music, and I'll say each one and then kind of talk a little bit more about each one. Okay, so number one, and I didn't read this one this last week. Thou shalt read the brief and keep it holy. Commandment number one, thou shalt read the brief and keep it holy. Read the brief, right there. There's a sign. Read the bleeping brief. And if you're just guessing, then don't be upset if they come at you and say, this isn't what we're asking for. The library gets to have what they want. And if they're giving you a brief with references and all of that, then you have to read the brief. It's what I talked about in week 1, but that is the most important. Read the brief and keep it holy. I don't want to talk more about that. We talked tons about reading the bleeping brief. If you want, you can check out the episode from week 1. So that's the first one. Commandment number 1. Thou shalt read the brief and keep it holy. Commandment number 2, thou shalt not steal, but referencing. Commandment number 2, thou shalt not steal, but referencing, ellipses, question mark. And what do I mean by this? Now, obviously we can't plagiarize, and we're shooting for originality here. But there is a line that we can kind of tap dance around. And I wanted to actually go back to my my whiteboard, and I appreciate all the love. Folks loved my whiteboard from last week. So I brought it back. And I know it's gray, but it's a whiteboard. And I just wanted to talk about the way that I consider originality, and I should probably do a whole podcast on this. But if originality is, a line, and way over here we have plagiarism. Plagiarism is bad. Don't do it. It's illegal. And then way over here we have 100% original. Right? And everything in between. And my Full Sail students are going to recognize this, because this is kind of my treatise on originality. And I'll talk about how references plug into this. And so right around in here, we have cloning or sound-alikes. These are things which are just this side of plagiarism. So we're not in any kind of legal danger, but we're not intentionally or unintentionally passing off somebody else's in wholesale as our own, right? That's plagiarism. And so cloning. And then we have modeling. Modeling is where you take a reference and use it as a blueprint for your own cue, usually in form and structure, but definitely instrumentation, harmonic language, how the chords move, the balance of major chords versus minor chords, and all of that. Maybe switch up some keys, and again, maybe in the podcast episode that I unpack all of this, I'll dig a little bit deeper. But that's modeling, and then we have using references. References is where you take multiple references. This is what I talked about in week 1 of the year. Take multiple references, extract commonalities, and then start creating works based off of your observation. Then we have, oh my gosh, my handwriting is terrible. Sorry. My apologies for YouTube folks. Influences. And influences are when you understand and have worked with references long enough, they kind of turn into influences, what you listen to, what you've studied. You know, a chef at a Waffle House doesn't have to look at a recipe cards for making pancakes or scrambled eggs. They know the recipe. And so then they can start kind of moving around. If they like this ingredient, maybe I like basil in my eggs. And so that wasn't on a recipe card anywhere. That was just your influences coming into play. And so then on the other side of that, we have 100% original, which is really where game music lives. It's where film score lives. It's definitely where artist brain lives, in the 100% original. And I would say that not many libraries are looking for 100% genre shattering, expectation subverting 100% original cues, because much of TV is derivative, and unapologetically so. I mean, a dating show is a dating show, a cooking show is a cooking show, and each one wants to have its own kind of twist, right? Its own hook, but it's still fundamentally, a racing show. A show about survival. We're going to put somebody out in the wilderness, give them a camera, and hope they make it. Sometimes they're naked. Sometimes they aren't. Sometimes they have zero food. Sometimes they're people hopefully and hilariously out of their element. That makes for interesting television. My point is that the programming itself is derivative. And again, I don't say that pejoratively. So much of our music needs to also be a little derivative. And that's okay to say. So that is my originality, my spectrum of originality. And so we need to live in our commandment, thou shalt not steal, but referencing. We can't plagiarize. Cloning feels a little icky. I tried to do as little of that as possible. But that middle ground, using references, modeling, pulling in things into our influences, that's where we should live, and that's where we live a lot of the time. So that is commandment number 2. Thou shalt not steal, but referencing. All right, commandment number 3. And I think these are kind of in order. Maybe not necessarily. Definitely the first and the last one. Number 3, thou shalt stick to one mood. Thou shalt stick to one mood, and one mood only. Remember, in production music, we are not looking for our cue to tell a complete story. Our music is there to help support the emotional beat of one type of scene, one emotional beat in a larger story. And so we're not going to write a cue that starts one mood and traverses another mood into another mood or emotion. So if you have a cue that starts jubilant, then it needs to end jubilant. And it needs to be consistently jubilant throughout. Now, that's not saying that there's not energy levels. There's absolutely energy levels. We don't want just jubilant the whole. I mean, there's room for shades of jubilance. That sounds like an emo band name. Or like a praise and worship team. But don't write a cue that starts jubilant and goes through the dark journey of the soul in through melancholy and then ends jubilant. You're making the editor's life way too difficult when you do that. You're giving them a problem that they have to fix. Because if an editor has a scene that starts jubilant, has melancholy moment in the middle, and then ends jubilant, they don't have the time or energy to go find the one cue which traverses that emotional arc. Well, what they're going to do is look for a cue that's jubilant, edit in a different melancholy cue that jives with the BPM, jives with the instrumentation, maybe even relative key and all of that. So they're going to edit in that melancholy cue. If you're lucky, it's one of your melancholy cues, but probably not. That's all right. And then they will edit in at the end of the scene a jubilant cue, which may or may not be the same cue from the beginning. Because an editor sees a scene and they have all of the narrative beats and they say, I want this music to support this one narrative beat, this one emotional beat, and then zinging off into another cue as that emotion shifts. Editors rely on music a lot to support their narrative storytelling, because in an unscripted TV, they don't have a group of writers helping to dictate all of that. So they depend on us. They depend on the music to do that. So we have to give them one mood, one emotion that underscores one beat, one emotional beat, and then they will edit them together. All right, so that is number 3. Number 4, thou shalt use complete phrasing. Thou shalt use complete phrasing. And what I mean by this is we can't just write a 1-bar idea and then loop it until the end of time. This is especially true of hip-hop cues, of melodic writing, of writing your drum programming. Have complete ideas, usually 4-bar ideas, usually, just depending on your tempo. But if you're writing a 4-bar melody, it shouldn't be a 1-bar melody motif that just gets repeated. You should add some variation in that. Complete phrasing. Make sure that the end of your phrase, this is my writing philosophy. Again, these are my commandments. These weren't handed down, right? There wasn't a Moses of production music come down and just dole it out. These are just the things that I have that should be like taped up to the wall so that I can remind myself. But complete phrasing. So when I write phrasing, I make sure that the end of the phrase drives energy into the following downbeat. So a drum fill coming in bar 4 of your phrase. The end of your melody, if possible, doesn't resolve on tonic. It actually pushes energy. It might build energy into the following downbeat. And this creates an internal momentum in your phrasing. So if you start on tonic and end on, say, the 5 chord harmonically, then that 5 chord in bar 4 pushes energy forward. But if you resolve harmonically in bar 4, so if you have a 1 chord, a minor 6 chord, into a 5 chord, and then a 1 chord, those are your 4 measures. Then you've created an energetic stall to where it's not, the phrase doesn't want to push forward, and you have 2 tonic chords in a row, and it can stall out. Melodically, I think this. With my percussion, my drum programming, I think this. Make a statement, repeat the statement, little 1-bar idea, repeat in the second bar, repeat the idea with a little variation. 3rd bar, repeat the motif again, and then in the 4th bar, a larger variation, repeat with a larger variation that then pushes energy forward. That's what I mean when I say complete phrasing. I feel like each one of these could be its own podcast episode. But complete phrasing, not just 1 bar that just gets looped. I mentioned hip hop. This is so important for hip hop and can be a real challenge when you're referencing hip hop, because if you're referencing Drake or will.i.am or whatever, you take Drake off of a commercially released record, you might end up with a backing track, a beat, which is just 1 or 2 bars looped. And we can't get away with that in production music. We're not giving the editor enough material to work with. So number 4, thou shalt use complete phrasing. And then number 5, Thou shalt use predictable layering. Thou shalt use predictable layering. What do I mean by that? That means that every 4 bars or 8 bars or a predictable number of bars, something is happening. We're building energy up and through our cue. It's all about creating editable, predictable, loopable chunks that an editor can then go in, cut apart, edit as needed. If we start creating wonky phrasing because it satisfies us creatively, then we dramatically run the risk of making our editor's job harder, and they're only going to suffer that so long before they move on to another cue. One of the first lessons I was taught when learning production music is every 4 bars, something new needs to happen. Every 4 bars, something new needs to happen. But every 4 bars doesn't mean something different happens. That's where some folks get into trouble. And I've seen cues where I've given this advice. Every 4 bars, something new needs to happen. It's like every 4 bars is like a whole new cue. Or it's just alternating this chunk and this chunk back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. I call that kind of like binary composition. A, B, A, B, A, B, A, B, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0. That's not usable. Every 4 bars, we need to be bringing something new up to a point. If we're using the typical kind of A, B, A structure, where A is building, you'll do that around the minute mark. Then around the minute mark, you're going to pull energy back into a breakdown. It's not it's a B section in that it is a different song section, but we're not actually dramatically changing keys. We're not, and this is just one of those structures. Trailer cues don't play by these rules. Song form, typical song form doesn't necessarily play by these rules. But anyway, my point is create predictable phrasing that an editor can easily see visually in the waveform and can work with. Remembering that editors see our music much more than they hear our music. They're going to drop it into Premiere or Final Cut or whatever, and they're looking for transients. They're looking for points in the cue that they can edit around, which brings me up to commandment number 6. Thou shalt include edit points. Thou shalt include edit points. Now, again, that could be its own podcast topic. Here's what edit points are in a nutshell. They take kind of 2 flavors. An edit point is an energetic pause in the cue, usually before a song section, that gives editors a point in which they can cut, extend, fade, do their fades, and add dialogue or a story beat or a punchline or something. That is an edit point. And edit points don't have to go to absolute 0, but they should be kind of a bloom in energy that then kind of decays a little bit and then pushes forward. I tend to put edit points right before my B section and when I return to my A section. And how intense the edit points are and how dramatic the edit points are, that is determined by the type of cue you're writing. If you're writing an ambient tension cue, that edit point might just be a whoom and a hold. But if you're writing a trailer cue, that edit point might be ba 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 bow. And then on the other side, you continue on. All right, so that's the first kind of way I think about edit points. Those pauses of energy, usually into the different song sections. And the length and intensity is governed by the type of cue you're writing. The second way I think about edit points are making sure that my waveform has visible transients in which or with which the editor can slice, easily view, cut, edit, loop, and join things together. If your wave file just looks way overly compressed, I call it the toothpaste waveform, which is kind of just toothpaste, then the editor doesn't have anything visually to go on to determine how can I cut this apart? How can I bring this together? I need to pull out 4 bars here. So, man, I got another 6 hours of editing ahead of me, and I don't want to sit there and count measures. So we have to be sure that our waveforms have dynamics, and at phrase points, I create little energetic pushes so that an editor can easily edit. Again, that's its own other podcast topic, and I probably will. Some of these will absolutely be podcast topics. I know for a fact that edit points will come up in a future podcast topic and workshop, because I am talking to an editor out in Hollywood right now who is a mutual friend, and I'm going to have him on the show. And he is a working editor, and we're going to hear truth from the source about editing and how we need to make editors' jobs easier. So that's edit points. Number 6, thou shalt include edit points. Okay, number 7. Commandment number 7, thou shalt have no other keys but one. Thou shalt have no other keys, key signatures, but one. Stick to one key. If you start in A major, you need to end in A major. Different types of cues can afford for some harmonic shenanigans. In the middle, dramedy cues, I'm looking at you, even though mine are forward, that's all right. Dramedy cues can traverse more chromaticism, but whatever you start with, you need to end with. Again, think like an editor. If an editor needs to duck out of the cue early, what they're going to look for is that final end piece. And that end piece needs to be in the same key so that they can dynamically grab it and edit and stick it in. But if you're changing keys, then you've tied their hands on what they can do with your cue. Again, harmonic motion is fine. But if I do any sort of modulations, I always make sure to return to tonic by the end, because the cue needs to rest in one key. Again, these are broad strokes. These are my commandments, and there are plenty of cues which break every single one of these commandments, just like there are plenty of people who break all the other biblical commandments. So there are plenty of exceptions to these, but these are the things that guide me. One key. Stay in one key. Just makes your life easy. Not to mention, when you fill out your metadata, right, you're gonna have to tell them what key it is. And if it's goes off-roading for 2 minutes and there's no real tonal center, that might make your editor's life difficult. So that's number 7. Thou shalt have no other keys but one. Which leads me into number 8. Thou shalt include a button or stinger ending. Thou shalt include a button or stinger ending. Now, I use the term button. It's just kind of a catch-all. Stingers tend to be a little bit more bam, and buttons tend to be a little softer, but stingers also mean there's a cut down called a stinger, which is usually an 8 to 12 second short version. And so there's nothing else called a button, but stinger means different things in different applications. So I avoid the word stinger, but some libraries do use a stinger ending. But I just say a button, which means your cue ends on tonic on the downbeat of the measure. This is that editable chunk that editors can use and slap wherever they need it in your cue when they're using your cue in their scene. And if we don't give them a solid, transient tonic chord on beat 1, then it's like they're not going to sit there and count for E and it's the and I need to give them the tools they need. Give them a little piece that they can just grab and chuck it wherever they want. The button ending. And that button needs to have no delays and stuff. It needs to have no rhythmic elements carrying on through it. That's all part of what being a button is. It's on tonic, it's on the downbeat. The rhythmic energy is removed as much as possible, which means you might have to go into your parameters and automate, the BPM delay in Omnisphere. It is a pain, I admit. At least in Logic, it's kind of a pain. But you got to do it. Your cue has to end on tonic, on beat 1 of the last measure. Has to ring out naturally. Can't sound chopped off. Also can't ring on for days. You can't have a 23-second audio tail. But commandment number 8, thou shalt include a button or stinger ending. Number 9, thou shalt not covet odd meters. Thou shalt not covet odd meters. Again, there are plenty of cues which are in odd meters, but you run the risk of making, you got it, your editor's life a challenge. So stick to 4/4, stick to 3/4, stick to 6/8, 12/8. Just make your job easy. Now, I've written cues in 5/8 and 7/8, 5/4, all of those. And some of them I've actually made air, which is cool. But it's definitely the exception and not at all the rule. Not to mention, it just makes your life easy. Just don't sweat it. Think 4/4, 3/4. Groups of 2, groups of 3. And move on. But editing or writing in odd meters can be frustrating for creating predictable phrasing, and it can be frustrating for editors who, if they need to create like a loop, not to mention, you run the risk of pulling focus from a scene because viewers are used to hearing 4/4 and 3/4. Obviously, not every cue on the planet is written in simple meter, in 4/4 or 3/4, 6/8, whatever. Obviously, you can get away with 7/8, 5/4. I had a cue in 9/8 that I talked about just last year. If you do that, then you have to work, or I find I have to work extra hard to make sure that 7/8 feels normal. But I never write in 7/8 or 5/4 or an odd meter just because, or because I'm bored. That's like the worst reason to write in an odd meter. Oh, I'm bored. I'm creatively bored. Well, I think we've lost focus there. The cue that I wrote in 9/8, I wrote in 9/8 because, and I think I talked about it in my sketching episode. I sketched out the melody without really regard to meter. I was just playing something, it was just kind of coming out of me. And then it wasn't until I sat down and did the math. I was like, hey, what meter is this? Oh, this is in 9/8. Okay, now I have to work really hard to make sure that sounds very predictable, which for me means putting solid transients on the downbeat so that every downbeat, whether it's 9/8 or 7/8 or 5 or whatever, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, just so that it visually creates patterns that an editor can use. So stick to 4/4, make your life easier. Stick to 4/4, 3/4, 6/8, 12/8. And I think it's gonna go a lot better, a lot more easy, a lot easier, I should say, for you. And then finally, number 10. Let me recap before I do number 10. Number 1, thou shalt read the brief and keep it holy. Number 2, thou shalt not steal, but referencing. Number 3, thou shalt stick to one mood. Number 4, thou shalt use complete phrasing. Number 5, thou shalt use predictable layering. Number 6, thou shalt include edit points. Number 7, thou shalt have no other keys but one. Number 8, thou shalt include a button or stinger ending. And then number 9, thou shalt not covet odd meters. And then number 10, which goes along with number 1. Thou shalt do whatever the library says. Thou shalt do whatever you're told. Whatever the library wants, the library gets. And if the library asks you to break every one of those commandments, all right, cool. This happens pretty frequently in our feedback sessions where they will play something and almost like number 1, nope. Number 2, nope. Tick, tick. We're breaking that rule, breaking that rule, breaking that rule. And then it's like, well, it's what the library asked for. I hear it. If the library wants something that changes keys, go for it. If the library wants something in 7/8, go for it. If the library says, hey, I don't want a button ending, or if the library asks you to clone, then do it. And if the library says, hey, we want -6 LUFS, do it. I mean, I didn't even get into all that technical stuff because those are the things that really change. If the library wants 30 stems and alt mixes and minus mixes, give it to them. Because there are precious few actual industry standards in the production music industry. Most of what we do is determined by whatever the library wants. And these commandments are an amalgamation of what I have seen across multiple libraries working with multiple publishers. These are the consistency. It's kind of like using references and finding the things which are all the same. These are the things that I keep coming back to. But at the end of the day, the library calls the shots. The publisher determines what they want, and we just have to trust that they have our best interest in mind, which I believe they do. Otherwise, don't work with them. And we just have to trust that they know what they're talking about and that their experience, supersedes our expectations creatively or administratively, business-wise, or whatever. With Rob and RR Hot, I have to defer to his experience. So when I do something that might go against some of these parameters, some of these commandments, or if he asks me to do something which I might creatively disagree with, that's all right. That's cool. Whatever. The library gets whatever the library wants. I just have to trust that they're going to get placed. And with Rob, that's absolutely true. Why would I argue with him when he's the one getting my music on the air? So, number 10, thou shalt do whatever the library says. I feel I should mention, when it comes to contracts and royalties and all that, I think let's be careful here, especially if it's a new relationship. The library says, I want 90% of your writing. Don't do that. Don't do that. I'm talking about, the creative process and that kind of thing. So I feel like I should mention that. But those are my 10 commandments for production music. What about you? Do you have things which govern your creative processes or your administrative process, your business dealings? I would love to hear from you. Please let me know in the comments below. I do read all of those and make every effort to respond. But that's gonna do it for that section, and we're gonna take a really quick break. And Mrs. 52Q's Shannon is going to chime in on how you can join us over in the community. And then when we return, we're going to be checking out a nostalgic Broadway-style cue. I don't think we've ever had a Broadway cue from composer and community member Mojo X called "Opening Night."
Hey y'all, I'm Shannon Croft, and I want to tell you that the 52Qs podcast is made possible by viewers and listeners just like you, composers and producers who are looking for a better way to connect and collaborate. You see, 52Qs isn't just another website selling static, pre-recorded videos to a mass audience. It's a fun, vibrant, and positive community that comes together online for sharing cues, getting feedback, and discussing what's up in the production music industry. You'll find both personalized feedback and live interaction, which are the best and fastest ways to grow your skills and earn more placements. The best part is that the 52Qs community is absolutely free. And when you're ready to take your career to the next level, we offer friends and family subscriptions, which unlock weekly live streams, live interactive group feedback sessions, monthly interactive workshops, and more. Head over to 52qs.com and sign up today. And while you're there, check out our personalized feedback videos, private lessons, and of course, merch. I can't wait to see you at 52qs.com.
Nice work. That was Opening Night by Mojo X. Oh, it's so fabulous. I really enjoyed this, and I wanted to play this on the podcast. First of all, we don't get many like musical type cues for like Broadway musicals, and it's just so well done. So well done. This is fantastic programming, really, really pulled together nicely. I think there are a couple of challenges for a cue like this. What this sounds like. This sounds like a Broadway number that was used specifically in a Broadway, like under dance numbers or like dialogue, or specifically for an actual musical, where when you hear, things like all this kind of bobbing and weaving, it feels like it's going along with something that's happening on the screen or on the stage already. Like, so like right through here, this might be a bustling kind of city scene or something like that. And now like a pretty woman walks by, and all the guys are like, ooh, like if it's a Guys and Dolls. In my mind, I'm thinking like Guys and Dolls. But the challenge is how would an editor use these? how would an editor use a cue like this, which has it almost feels underscore or has so many um, turns and twists in the arrangement. It's expertly done. I really, really enjoyed this, but I think an editor might have a hard time. Now, how do we translate that? Well, it might mean that we just have a little bit more consistency in our overall form, and maybe ease in and out into these transitions a little easier, or a little bit more predictably. Going back to all my 10 commandments, this breaks a lot of them, which is fine for what it is. But if we're thinking like an editor, it's gorgeous, fantastic programming. I think programming-wise, the only thing that kind of stuck out for me were some of those the woodwind runs. Woodwind runs are so tough to do. Those things are really, really tough to do in MIDI, and I think otherwise everything is really, really on point. And but before I leave the whole underscore, I don't know if you should like try to whip this into production music shape, making a little bit more predictable phrasing and predictable layering and all of that stuff. I mean, that's going to require major surgery, and you might just hack this to pieces and might not end up liking it anyway. So, have you thought about writing a musical? Or underscore? This is film music territory that I think from a production music standpoint would be tough to use. But the mix sounds great. The programming sounds great. I will say, and this is my 30 years experience as a pit percussionist. These things, the snare drum, hold off on the snare drum until later in the cue. So many times I would be watching these and reading, and it's just kicking hi-hat like this. Yeah, hold off on the snare drum. Don't bring the snare drum. And the percussion sounds pretty far back and it sounds like the drums are way far back, and the xylophone that comes in a little bit later. And so I would just make sure that everything feels like it's kind of happening in the same room. I love the pizzicato strings here. And the pizzicatos come back a little bit later. See, at this point, we're a good 30 seconds in or so. We would want to be restating that theme and building upon it. And I think you have something here. Like, call this like a shopping type of a cue. Blip, 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 that kind of old school like Kmart type shopping, and that could be really, really effective. But we would want to take that theme, repeat the theme, build upon it. We can veer off, off-road a little bit, but definitely not, we're in a new key, we're in a new vibe, which is a requirement if you're writing underscore. It's a requirement if you're writing a musical. You can take a 30-second detour while you're doing all of those things that composition professors tell you to do. Development, arc, change keys, modulate, return, all of those things. It just creates a level of harmonic and melodic sophistication that is just too dense and too rich for production music, in my experience. Some really nice horn programming. I would love to know what library, I would love to know what sax library. So each one breathes. Yeah, this sounds like vintage, golden age, Broadway. Yeah, I'm just listening and enjoying it now. This brings back so many memories of all of the musicals I've played. Ah, the squeal there at the top, the bend. Nice. Yeah, overall, the snare drum's just too busy throughout. And that's where that xylophone feels really far back. Nice. Good job. This is a fantastic cue. This is a fantastic cue that honestly, I don't know if you need to whip it into shape. The challenge would be finding a home for it, and finding finding an editor who is going to love it. This is going to be the type of cue that if it lands, it's going to be the perfect cue that the editor has been looking for. It's super creative. It's expertly programmed. It is interesting. It's engaging. It's everything that needs to happen in a musical, like on stage. I would love to play this. I want to play this. All these tempo changes and feel changes and rubatos and odd meters and all that stuff. That is candy when I'm back there playing that instrument in a pit. I pointed to my drums for you hot podcast folks, listeners. That's But for production music, I just think it's too rich. It's too rich and might make it a challenge for an editor. But those are my thoughts. Those are my thoughts for you. And by the way, if you want feedback on your own cues, this is something that I offer. You can head over to 52cues.com/coaching and order up your very own feedback video. I provide a 15-minute high-def video where I go into all of those things. I talk about form, structure, harmonic language, the mix, even the title. By the way, Mojo, title, opening night, I love it. Absolutely, that's a fantastic title. But head over to 52cues.com/coaching and get your own video. And while you're there, you can book a one-on-one session or even find out information about our mastermind. But that is going to do it for us today. You definitely want to tune in next week, where I will be joined by Sam Hulick and Sarah Pocious of Real Crafter. They're going to be talking about Real Crafter. They're going to be addressing some of the things that I talked about in my comparison when I compared SoundCloud versus Real Crafter versus Disco. And they're going to maybe correct some things that I was wrong about, and also talk about what's coming up in Real Crafter and how Real Crafter might be the right fit for you. So you definitely want to tune in next week. But that is going to do it for me this week. I hope you had a fantastic week 3, and I hope your week 4 is going well. And I know it's going well. How do I know that, friends? Because I know and trust and believe that the universe has amazing plans just for you. Until next time, peace. The 52 Cues podcast is copyright 2023 at 18 Studios, all rights reserved. The music played on the podcast is copyright of their respective owners and is used with permission and for educational purposes only. For more information, including joining the community and submitting your cue for consideration on the podcast, head over to 52cues.com.